Hello, life advice. Maybe don't start committing to try to record YouTube videos in the middle of teaching an intensive term. Today I want to talk about an Irish film, or kind of an Irish-British film, called The Wind That Shakes the Barley, that came out in 2006, and I want to talk about really how we kind of dealt with it in class the last couple of days. A quick refresher, I am currently teaching centre term, which is in some liberal arts colleges, they call it January term, or you teach it in May and you call it Maymester. So it's designed as an intensive, kind of exploratory, even experimental kind of class experience. My students have me for 3 hours a day. I'm their only class. They're my only class. It's a great opportunity to do different kinds of things. So, for example, they have a podcast they're making for me this weekend, and they'll be making video content for me at the end of the term, which is coming up actually before too long. My course this term is talking a lot about how history is conveyed in maybe popular culture or, media, works of art and so on. Popular history is the name of the course, hence my earlier video on the Nazis. Today we watched the film The Wind That Shakes the Barley, and in particularly yesterday I gave them a lot of setup in talking about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and talking about kind of, the historical roots of that, or at least some version of that. So I want to share with you a little bit the film, why I picked it, some things I think are notable about it, and then I'll share a little bit kind of what my students and I talked about today. So, The Wind That Shakes the Barley came out in 2006, directed by Ken Loach, an Englishman, as I said to the students, just trying to give a sense of, some of the interesting kind of different inputs that come into this, and starring Cillian Murphy, who of course now is Oscar-winning Cillian Murphy, but at the time was young, up-and-coming, interesting actor Cillian Murphy. The film is set in Cork. This narrative begins in 1920 and wraps up in the spring, summer of 1922. And therefore it kind of begins in the middle of the Irish War of Independence, and it wraps up just as the Civil War has begun. So maybe some primers I'll talk about later on. But Cillian Murphy plays one of two brothers in rural Cork, which is where Cillian Murphy is from, and the film follows these two brothers in their kind of immediate social circle. Cillian Murphy's character's lover, and their kind of childhood friends who also serve as comrades in arms in the IRA battalion they serve in throughout the conflict. Early on, especially in the film, the representation of British troops is extremely unsparing, and the style of the film's storytelling is very thematic, very intentionally thematic, which is to say, the plot itself is fairly straightforward, which is, spoiler alert for a 20-year-old, very well done film. Two brothers coming from the same background. One is going to go and be a doctor in London, that's Cillian Murphy, and kind of recognises early on that to defy the British or to try and take the British on militarily is probably futile and not a sensible way to go. And his brother Teddy, played by Padraig Delaney, who is more kind of engaged with the pure revolutionary kind of side of it, that we have to fight for what we have to fight for our country, etc., etc. They go through many traumatizing experiences, and at the end of the film, by the end of the film, I should say, Cillian Murphy's character has become more of an ideologue. Padraig Delaney's character, Teddy, has accepted some level of compromise, and now they find that their positions have been switched. And the film, very tragically, very intentionally tragically, and very formally tragically, ends with the political execution of Cillian Murphy's character at the hands of the unit commanded by his brother, which mirrors an earlier scene, which is important for Murphy's character, where he kills a very young informant. So that is kind of the basic, quote unquote, the basic plot of The Wind That Shakes the Barley. It is not any kind of an intentionally complicated film in the way that it tells the story, but it definitely, I would say, it gives its audience a lot of respect. It allows the audience to piece things together. It does drop the occasional factoid, Sinn Féin won so many seats in Dáil Éireann. It never tells you who Sinn Féin are or what Dáil Éireann is. It never really explains who the Black and Tans are. There's like a brief reference to them. You have these powerful snippets in scenes. So, for example, today I had to fill in for my students what some of these things mean. So, for those who don't know, in 1919, Irish kind of revolutionary forces, a party named Sinn Féin, which literally translates as "we ourselves," hold elections in Ireland which are not sanctioned by the British government, which of course claims dominion over Ireland at that time, and they form a parliament, and that parliament has an army called the Irish Republican Army. And so this is the history, the very, very basic history of the Irish War of Independence. And so the great act of resistance is not just military resistance, but taking ownership of an independent democracy that doesn't accept the legitimacy of British rule. As 1921 goes on in particular, Irish forces have done quite well, but realistically are quite outgunned and outmanned by the British, or are soon to be. For much of the War of Independence, they're fighting troops that have heavy contingents of what in Irish history we call the Black and Tans. They're called the Black and Tans colloquially because these are men, most of whom were demobilized from World War I, and they wore a kind of a motley uniform, maybe a black coat and a tan pants, or the other way around, or something like that. And so, they were irregular forces, really, who were kind of set loose on the Irish, the Irish public. Certainly that would be kind of a traditionalist kind of a narrative. And so, although the film does depict horrifying treatment of innocent civilians by British troops, there is a distinction there about kind of these Black and Tans versus, quote unquote, regular British troops or something like that. Although, again, the film doesn't make a huge effort to explain that to you. So I explain to my students, this is who the Black and Tans are. I will say, to my students' credit, and we had a great conversation about the movie, many of them picked up on the fact there is a scene in the film where a British officer who does appear to have a different tenor and different attitude to many of his fellow military figures, he literally says to Cillian Murphy's character, "What do you expect? These men served in the Somme, they saw their friends blown to pieces, and now they're here." So there's a statement being made there that is not as simple as the British Empire is evil and is trying to kill Irish people, but that these individual people, they are violent, and violence is the issue, right? And that's kind of a major kind of element and major theme of the film. In the winter of 1921, December of 1921, Michael Collins, who'd been the leader of the Irish military effort, signs a treaty, the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which in Irish parlance is typically just called the Treaty, which, among other things, creates what we now know as Northern Ireland, which effectively carves out what ends up being 6 counties, Protestant-dominated 6 counties, separate from the 26 counties, one was the Irish Free State. And then the Irish Free State, as it's known, has its own parliament, but is a dominion, which is to say it's not a colony per se. It has a certain amount of autonomy, but still remains within the British Empire, and, for example, doesn't have any foreign policy ability or anything like this. This is all important context that my students don't really know at all, but it's kind of being dropped in at you. Like I said, I think Loach kind of has a lot of respect for the audience and goes, well, they're going to follow what I want to say. A big thing Loach does in the movie is talking about, like, well, what does a state do? What is a state supposed to be? Yes, they're fighting for an idea, but what will the idea look like when it manifests as a government? And so for Cillian Murphy's character and a couple of other characters, he wants a socialist government. Not a communist government, but certainly a government that is very focused on redistribution of wealth and certainly kind of fairness for every section of society. There are a couple of points in the film where Murphy's character definitely takes on what at the time, and probably I would say today in Ireland to a certain extent, would be a radical position, which is the idea, for example, of no private property, that everything's communal property and so on. These kind of things are kind of popped out there a little bit. But it's a good kind of comparison in the film. For example, there's a moment midway through where a wealthy man who's been loaning money to poor Irish people, in this particular case an old Irish woman, a poor Irish woman, and he has allowed the interest rates to get to 500% because she's not able to pay him. The court finds against him, but then Teddy, Cillian Murphy's character's brother, kind of leads him out, and he's going to make a compromise because he needs the guy's money to buy weapons. And so it's a very clear representation of what did happen, which is kind of an Irish revolutionary movement that wants to maintain some kind of a relationship with capital and with business leaders and everything else, versus Cillian Murphy's character, who has kind of stayed, quote unquote, maybe more true, more ideologically pure, something like that. So I felt it worked very well in the class. I was very happy. I was delighted with how much the students seemed to certainly enjoy it, but also be able to engage with it. I wasn't really sure. You never know what people will like and not like, just in general. But generational changes do happen. So when I've taught a science fiction class before, for example, and shown some science fiction movies that are very dear to me, the pacing is not what current traditional age students might expect, or they're thrown a little bit by what it's going to be, and so their experience is different to what I anticipated. I was very pleasantly surprised today because I wasn't sure how they would take to Loach's his decisions with storytelling, and I also wasn't sure. Some students worry a little bit that they're not following things. I think they worry too much. I think they should just relax and watch the film, read the reading, and so on. But they handled it really well, and we had a really good conversation. I will say it was difficult for them, and it was a difficult question that I asked them. How do we connect the wind that shakes the barley to the Troubles in Northern Ireland at the beginning of the late 1960s and run until the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, which is something we talked in detail about yesterday. And I think that was something that that was a little bit not challenging. I don't think it was challenging for them to like get it. I think they got it. But it wasn't as easy to kind of vocalize in our conversation in the classroom, is what I would say. But being able to talk about, well, to what extent are themes of violence, state violence, institutional ideology versus personal belief, to what extent is nationalism, or to what extent is any kind of unifying ideology ultimately potentially dehumanizing? These are things that Ken Loach really cares about, and I think that elevate The Wind That Shakes the Barley. It's not like a pro-Irish, anti-British movie. It's very much, it's a tragic film about the prices that we pay for things that are dear to us. And so in that sense, I thought it really worked very well. And if you haven't seen The Wind That Shakes the Barley, I really would recommend it. I mean, it's not a breeze to watch. You know, it's not like a Friday night date night kind of movie, or I guess it depends on the date. But it's a very thoughtful film. I think the performances are really very impressive. It's a beautiful film to watch. A lot of thought was put into how to frame different kind of things, and I think it's very evocative of the human beings in the story, and I really liked that, to be able to share with them, hey, you know, be thinking about the kind of film or video game or album or whatever it is that we're talking about as a work of popular culture. This is a film that won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. This is a film that was very highly regarded, would definitely be seen as an artistic film, that did, you know, relatively well commercially, but it's not designed to be like a commercial behemoth of a film kind of a thing. And so to be thinking about that kind of thing versus our previous film, which was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is very different in its approach in all these different ways. So I'll be honest, the 3 hours a day thing is pretty tiring, so I hope I'll be back next week. But until then, I hope you find this interesting, and definitely look up The Wind That Shakes the Barley, and learn more about Irish history in the 20th century. It's fascinating stuff. Thanks. Goodbye.